process. So again, like this information that I'm sharing today is really information that I've just gotten in the past day. We know that the House is still, planning to act, but we also know that they're planning on releasing the NOFA shortly after the government opens. So the next time I meet with you, we'll probably have had the NOFA out. It'll be more clear. The other thing that I would say, which is really, really important, is that we've been really, really fearful of the NOFA only having a week turnaround time. Part of the concern about grants running out was that the deadline that now is being floated is in January. So if the NOFA came out like next week, the deadline may not even be into January to submit back in. So if that were the case, clearly there'd be no hope for any funding coming out and decisions until July at a minimum. So, I'll continue to keep people updated. The COC will continue to be working with the SHC. We're hearing things real time. We've been engaging federal lawmakers. I think Colin Ryan is on the call here. He may have some additional things that he's been hearing and adding, and he's been engaging on. I thank Colin for his ongoing commitment and work. I know he's engaged. Well, he can speak to that, to what he's been doing specifically. But I think, things are looking more ominous. Colin, do you have anything to add?
I think one of the challenges is I'm not quite sure that Cullen has the ability to present today.
Okay, well, let me just share a few things that I know that he has been engaged on. He has helped us to engage with Senator Collins' office, which we've continued to engage in multiple ways through this, extremely consistently. Senator King's office with his involvement this week and I guess you'd say crossing the line and being part of the group that supported the Senate's vote. Because of his influence with that, we had circled back to him and hope that he would have some influence, and we had been meeting with him all along, giving him information about the implications. They assured us they understood that Senator King understood that. Senator Collins' office has assured us that that she understood and understands the issue and the magnitude. Okay, Rich, I see that Noelle has got her hand up. I'm sorry, I can't really see anyone else.
That's great. I'll call on people as I see them, Dean. So yes, Noelle, you're first one up. Hi, Noelle.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, Dean, I had read something about 20-something Republican senators signing on to a letter regarding the COC NOFO and urging them to maybe pivot the way that they had been looking and how disruptive it would be, where we had been initially promised that it was a 2-year one. Wondering if you've heard anything about feedback from that, if it was received, and if you heard anything about that, because it sounds like that's not making any movement on where they're going.
Yeah, no, I would say, that has happened. There are 20 congressmen who signed on to that letter. That did move forward. I think many people became hopeful with that action. And so that is still out there. And so with the vote of the Congress, with the House of Representatives, there's, that's still out there, and those were Congress folks. But I think people saw the sign of what went into the Senate vote and what it's going to mean to sort of move things forward, and really had hoped, because some of the major action with SNAP and other advocacy efforts, people hoped that could happen for our COC funding as well. It could be seen as carrying it forward for one more year, et cetera. And so that was not put in, but there is still the vote for Congressman and we're just not sure what that means.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Noel, for the question. Other questions for Dean? While I'm waiting, I guess one of the basic questions I have, Dean, just so the council is aware, is there anything I have been working closely with Dean in regards to keeping up with these updates and his board chair, of course, Greg Payne, as we're responding to this. And again, want to thank Cullen and really all of our representatives and senators who have, I think, know the magnitude of these challenges that we're facing. But is there any further communication or support that the council can provide to you, Dean, and your board of directors at the Continuum of Care? Is there anything that you need from us specifically right now?
I mean, I think that in a couple days we will then be like maybe next week we'll have the information we've really needed, because we've just been going on whatever information we can get. There continues to be individuals that raise legal action, through the AG, and whether there's entities within the state that want to get on and tag along any other legal actions that are happening. I know, Rich, you had reached out to the AG. I think that that our chair has reached out to just make sure that the AG was informed of what was happening, not that there has been any formal recommendations to tag along on anything, any organizations that I know of that have done that, et cetera. That has not been brought forward to our board because we haven't had substantive things to act on yet. So there has been those have been statements that continue to arise, and communities. I think many communities are waiting to see what comes out with the NOVA to see whether really that they could or should do anything like that. So that I think is just sort of one outstanding thing. I would also say that I appreciate the leadership that Rich provided, and that we were able to get letters out to the governor and legislature, et cetera. There have been other briefing information that went to to legislature and governors to just sort of continue to keep them advised. And so that has continued to happen. We've continued to provide op-ed and TV and media interviews, and so I think that will certainly be continued based on what we find to be true once the NOFA, is released.
Yeah, my intention is as soon as Dean and the Continuum of Care's board of directors issues out any information or announcements related to the NOFA once it lands, whether it be a week or two or whatever that is, we will share that immediate information with the statewide homeless council's mailing list, so everyone will kind of get double emails. But I think we'll try to get that information shared. In relation to the call with the Attorney General's office, we did want them to know that this was a threat to our existing Continuum of Care and the spectrum of services that we've offered here in the state of Maine. I think they're reviewing the situation, and what they're doing is reaching out to other state attorney generals as well, because they know that this is a national issue, so it's not just going to impact Maine. Obviously, there's going to be changes happening in many continuums of care across the state. So the AG's office here in Maine is reaching out to other AG's offices and trying to figure out what opportunities and next steps they can take. And I haven't looped back to them, but they haven't looped back to me. But when they do, I will share that information. And the last thing that Dean mentioned, I do want to just repeat that I think the council knows that I, along with Dean, sent joint letters to both Governor Mills and legislative leadership in the state legislature, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, in regards to this threat. So those letters went out a couple weeks ago, and people were informed. And so I think one of those letters has been posted on the mainehomelessplanning.org website, so you can access that letter as a public document if you wish to see it. So we are doing our best to try to share information with people. Any other questions or concerns or comments from the council? It sounds like
just one more thing, Rich. I did
Sure.
want to make sure everyone was aware that our board of directors did meet. They have been fully briefed. They are now standing ready and to act quickly based on what happens with the NOFA and the the changes to our scoring, our appeals process, and in all the things that I've mentioned today, they understand that it's a very quick turnaround time, and they're standing ready to be able to act in whatever way it makes sense.
Thank you for that, and thank you to your board of directors. I see in the comments that Cullen has access now to a microphone and camera access, so you don't have to speak if you don't want to, Cullen. He said in the chat that Dean's report was pretty accurate and in sync what he'd been able to surmise as well. But Cullen, any last minute thoughts on the federal policy issues? He may be having technical difficulties like the rest of us. Oh, he still does not have access. All right, well, Cullen, you can email me later. We can get information out if we need to. Thanks, Dean, for the update. I think we're right on schedule. Is there any other things you wish to share from the continuum of care before we move on with the other agenda items today?
No, I think that is that's all I'm gonna say today. Thank you.
Okay, great. I know we're facing great challenges. We are going to get through this together, and I think the key is going to be coordination of communication and some really difficult choices down the road about how we think about limited resources and what we can do with what we have left on the table. So we'll keep everyone posted as we go forward this winter. Thanks, Dean, for the time today and being here. All right. I always think it's important in a 2-hour call to have a break. So we're going to take a 6-minute break. It's 10:24 right now. Get off your cameras, stretch your legs, go get a cup of coffee or a glass of water, and we'll be back at 10:30 to continue on with the agenda. Thanks, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. Scott, is it okay? And Tara, is it okay if we continue on with the meeting?
Yes.
Great. Welcome back. We're now going to have two major discussions at the last half of this meeting. One is devoted to our policy agenda. As you know, one of the roles of the Statewide Homeless Council is to identify legislative priorities every year and to give guidance to the governor and the legislature on efforts to end and address homelessness in the state. We typically put out a fourth kind of a slate of policy priorities, and we call on a joint committee held with the Continuum of Care, our policy committee, to help us identify those priorities every year. And so I think Andrew Lardy is here as one of the co-chairs of the policy committee. The COC co-chair is Amanda from the Developers Collaborative, and Andrew is here today to help us review what's been happening at the policy committee and the recommendations they're making for the 2026 legislative season. This is the time for us to consider this because we need to get those communications to the legislative leadership before the start of the session in January. So Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can walk us through this.
Thanks, Rich. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. And if I get fuzzy or something, just let me know and I'll turn the camera off and see if I can keep my data flow adequate to communicate here. I'm on the road, obviously. And Rich, I had sent over, I don't know if you happen to see for me this email with a link to a Google Doc. Is that something you can bring up as a share right now or throw in the chat? And if not, I can just start talking.
Yes,
That's fine
yes,
too.
I can start to do that. 1 second. Well, just give me a minute to share my screen. I'm assuming
Of
I can
course.
share.
Great. So, and if you can throw this in the chat, people can feel free to log into it too. This is just a little Google Doc with a written summary of the things that I'll be talking through here. You know, between the new co-chairs of the Statewide Homeless Council and COC's Policy and Advocacy Committee have now met with the group 3 times, and of course the lineup keeps changing as folks add themselves into the group. I think now the total mailing list is up to something like 32 or 35 people. So we met in August, September, and October. And then heading into the October meeting, there was a survey where there was an opportunity to rank some competing priorities. There were 5 of those. They were by no means the only 5 things that anybody had named, but they were the 5 that seemed to have the most traction in conversations. So then in the October meeting, we reviewed the findings of the survey, what people had weighed in with, and then also just had more of an open discussion about each of those 5 topics. And in the end, among the 5 that were on offer, the group, at least those who were voting and speaking up, decided individually one at a time on each of these 5 possible policy priorities to include all 5 of them as the committee's recommended slate of policy priorities. So rather than sort of stick with a more focused short list that we could say to people, this is if you can give me one favor this year, it's this one favor. The committee felt it was made most sense to sketch something more broad. So I'm going to run through the state of those 5 things. And again, you can see them there in Rich's screen share. They're in no particular order really, but this is sort of the order in which there was the most unanimity, I would say. The top one coming out, of course, is the effort to secure more permanent funding to underwrite the operation of our shelter network. And as you can see there is a bill that is actually, Rich, could you zoom in a little bit on that? Just so that more of the width of your screen is, there we go, it's a little more legible, thank you. There is a bill that is under consideration that has been drafted by Representative Drew Guttine of Westbrook. There was actually a second bill drafted by Senator Rachel Talbot Ross. And of course, the Legislative Council in October voted, so that's the leadership of the House and the leadership of the Senate. They reviewed all of the proposed bills for the second year of the biennium and voted on each of them whether or not they would advance for consideration. So in that process, Representative Guttine getting one of these days, still just an LR, does not have text, it just has a title. But the bill drafted by Senator Rachel Talbot Ross was voted down. So that means right now shelters have one prospective funding vehicle among all the bills that are going to be discussed in the new year. And as you can see there, this is a bill that of course will have a fiscal note attached. It's about funding. We understand, although this is not formal yet, we understand that the novelty that's going to be involved is that it's going to assign a share of the revenue generated by the real estate transfer tax. So this is an ongoing tax that's collected through activity in real estate market, buying and selling of things. And that would mean that it's something that can be locked and it does not have to be allocated over and over and over again individually from the general fund. It would be a formula that provides some sustained funding for underwriting the operations of the shelters. So that would be something that we haven't had in the past. And we're obviously eager to see what it actually looks like, what are the details of the full text. And then we'll be working on with Representative Gattin on making sure that the co-sponsor slate makes a lot of sense and that we are all advocating and singing with one voice. Right now, our task really in the group of shelter executive directors that have been collaborating over the past year or so is really trying to make sure that the issue remains highly salient. As we know, we are heading into a busy season, the holiday season, the legislative season, and not wanting legislators to forget that even though we managed to get one more year of Band-Aid funding, that the topic is generally still not solved. And so ringing the bell again about the precarity of at least some, if not many, of the shelters in our state. So that, I think, is a overly fulsome summary of those 5 bullets there under topic 1. So that brings us to the next subject there, an affordable housing construction bond. As you can see there, there's a bill put forth by Senator Chip Curry that would be, of course, having a fiscal note associated with it because it would be taking on new debt for the state. And I think that that one was voted out of the Legislative Council, notably unanimously. So I think that one is seen as having very, very strong support, among legislative leadership from both parties, as well as more broadly than that. And as you see there has been a lot of focus on this from MACH, from the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition. And so a thing that I'll come back to at the end is that as an operational matter, our joint committee is hoping to and intending to create little working groups of members, little subcommittees that are each focused on one of these topics, one of these bills, and doing the work associated with that advocacy. So the subgroup that ends up convening to back up the affordable housing construction bond will be collaborating directly with Senator Curry and collaborating with MACH to make sure that we are doing the right things at the right times to the right audiences. And I will leave it there for that one. So that brings us on to the question of general assistance, presumptive eligibility. As you all know, there's quite a patchwork around the state and how different municipalities have interpreted whether and how shelters can be reimbursed for the cost of housing local residents. And there was a hope that could be addressed by clarifying the rules and not having, and sort of forcing the hand of the HHS rules folks. And so that was a bill put forward by Representative DeBrito from Waterville with, I know, a lot of input and conversation from my colleague, Dr. Katie Spencer-White. And unfortunately, Legislative Council, when they considered that one, voted not to advance it, did not consider it to meet the criteria for the second year of the biennium, which is that it's an emergency, for example. I'm not sure exactly what all those criteria, how they're laid out. But the point is that bill is on the ropes now. That proposed bill is on the ropes. And so this coming week, there is a day where all of the bills that were voted not to advance can be appealed by their sponsor. And so Representative DeBrito will be appealing that and trying to make the case to give that some new life. And if the Leg Council is not persuaded by her, then that will be dead. So we'll know more. Let's see, the 20th, today's Wednesday, right? So we'll know more in 9 days. We'll be making sure that we communicate. So feel free to watch the headlines if you want to get that. I'm sure that those results will all be published by the Legislative Council. There will be links available to find the outcomes of all those appeals. The next two, are we on number 4 right now or on number 5? I can't even think. Sorry. Yeah, the next two. So the next two are both topics associated with bills that had support in the first year of the biennium, existing bills. There was testimony, there were hearings, and they were carried over into the second year of the biennium. So the first one is about funding for more diversion staffing around the state. Representative Mark Mallon was a champion there, had been collaborating closely with United Way of Southern Maine, just because that's their neighborhood. And right now we're in touch with Representative Mallon to ask about next steps, but it is not clear to me yet how carried over bills will be taken up in the second year of the biennium. We do know that the conventional wisdom is there is no money. Don't ask for things that cost money, or certainly don't ask for things that cost money unless you're going to be also proposing a special way to pay for them that is easy to say yes to. So that is the state of play on the diversion funding. Right now it has a fiscal note of $750,000, I believe, per year. So that's not small, although it's not. Well, what can I say? It's less than $1 million. So maybe that is small. And finally, number 5, not last but not least, bill regarding discrimination against renters based on their source of income, discrimination by landlords against renters who would like to pay for part of their rent using a voucher, which currently, depending on who you ask, is allowable, or at least happens. Even if it's not allowable, it's certainly happening. And so this bill, again, was heard, had support, was carried over, sponsored by Representative Cheryl Golick. And again, not sure how it will be handled in the second year of the biennium, waiting for guidance and updates about process from Representative Golick herself. And again, the kind of big take home point is all 5 of these will have a working group from within the Policy and Advocacy Committee, assuming all 5 of them survive. If the DeBrito bill dies, then that will not have a working group. But that's, I hope, a useful summary of sort of what's been happening, what's on the horizon, how we are trying to be collaborative, how we are trying to mobilize the committee itself. It continues to evolve. It's a kind of, it's a large group of people, and some people are very enthusiastic about finding time to do the work, and some just want to be kind of flies on the wall. So everyone here is still welcome to do either of those things. Sign up and be in the meeting quietly, or sign up and make sure that you're in a working group and making things happen. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Andrew, you did a good job in reviewing all the areas, so thank you for taking a moment to outline those 5 areas for us. This is an odd year because it is the second year of the biennium, and as Andrew said, the legislature is trying to look for specific emergency bills. In a traditional year, we might be actually proposing legislation for the first time, and we would probably do this discussion in October, so that we had time to look for sponsors. But as Andrew said, all 5 areas either are existing legislation where it's been a held over, or there's an emergency aspect to it. And some of the bills, as he said, the water is being carried by particular people. What I'm going to propose is that this council also recognize that this policy committee is held jointly with the continuum of care. And as Dean was able to say earlier, there's obviously a new board of directors. And if we're going to be continuing on in this kind of framework where the policy platform is carried by both the statewide homeless council and the continuum of care board of directors, which is now newly constituted, I think that this council needs today to vote on what areas we are proposing to the continuum of care. The continuum of care board chair and their leadership would have to then determine which policies they would agree to that we would hold jointly together. So that's the process. Is today's discussion is to help us get to the frame of what are we proposing to the continuum of care that we carry going forward, and then we'll let the continuum of care get back to us to figure out what we're jointly working on together. So I just wanted to frame that for the council, that's the kind of framing that we're under. I think Andrew did a good job in identifying 5 areas that we could propose. Doesn't mean that the council today has to vote for all 5. As was already stated by Andrew, one of the legislations is in trouble. The GA presumptive eligibility LR is now in appeal since it did not get off the table for review, but maybe we'll know more in a week or so, in like 9 or 10 days. Okay, just wanted to frame that for people. I'm willing to take questions now in regards to the state policy, and then I'm going to call a vote on the 5 areas eventually. So what questions or comments do people want to share in regards to the policy?
I just wanted to make a quick comment about the GA piece. So I think that I understand we're voting for what to advocate for this upcoming legislative session, but we also discussed in the committee about let's say that GA bill dies, that it would still perhaps make sense for us to keep that subcommittee going to talk about all the other aspects of GA that we all know have flaws. And so I just want to throw that out there. And so that perhaps is separate from the vote, Rich, that you're looking at, but I just wanted folks to know that we're not just looking at it in this very short term, but what are our longer term strategies as well.
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Emily, for reviewing that. And I think you're right. Just because something isn't voted on today doesn't mean that we can't keep it in our back pocket for 2027 for the next legislative session, because as we know, one of the major tools we have in our toolbox to address homelessness in Maine from a preventative standpoint is general assistance. And we also know that the administration of general assistance gets complicated and is not uniform because of the way that municipalities in the state of Maine have defined their own approaches to general assistance. And so that's going to be an ongoing topic, I think, for us to address moving forward. Other questions or comments? Katie White is putting in the comments, the presumptive eligibility bill, if it does not advance, is exactly the kind of clearing the runway work the statewide homeless council should be undertaking, since the Department of Health and Human Services is on the statewide homeless council. This is not rocket science. It is consistency and clarity. Rich, we work on it now. Every bit of advocacy doesn't occur at the State House. We can look at other vehicles besides legislation. The problem is the DHHS rule, she writes. So there's that. So she's adding some comments in the chat, which you can see. Other questions or comments from the council members?
Well, I just want to affirm what Emily and Katie both suggested. So I mentioned briefly, public advocacy in the media around salience and public conversation and salience for policymakers. I truly have a lot to learn about how to engage the state policy executives about shifting their things internally. But Katie makes a great point. If we're all in the same room, let's improve things.
Thanks, Andrew. I see your hand up, Scott.
Yeah, actually, it's Eric Jorgensen here at Maine Housing. I was just going to say, one of the questions that came up from Andrew was a question about what would happen with bills that were carried over from the first session and how those would get handled. And those just get added directly to the docket. So those will be taken up. And I would just say watch for hearings and watch for action on those. And I think oftentimes they'll take them up earlier. My sense with the Housing and Economic Development Committee is they disposed of most of the key housing bills last year, and they're going to be focusing more this year on economic development stuff. But there's a lot of carryover business that's come through, and definitely, I think these will be taken up, and I would imagine they'll be taken up earlier on because they don't need to be printed or anything like that. So I just watch for those.
I appreciate that, Eric. Eric, while you're talking, I want to ask a question. One of the things that I consider from the statewide homeless council's perspective, as well as the continuum of care, is our individual time capacity to work on some of these issues. The good news about this list is that there are several bills here presented: the shelter funding bill and the affordable housing construction bond, where the bucket of water is really being carried by other organizations. The shelter funding bill is being coordinated through the shelter executive directors, the shelter network here in Maine. And I think they're going to take the lead on that. But certainly the continuum of care and the statewide homeless council could add value by signing on in support and letting communication happening. But we would not have to have the burden of carrying that legislative weight ourselves. Additionally, the affordable housing construction bond, the water is being carried by the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, which has had a strong presence at the legislature. And again, we could add value as a voice. But all of that is in the mix for me as I think about kind of what do we have capacity to do. Those are being carried forward. Eric, do you have any thoughts about any other time commitment besides obviously communication to the council, to the legislative committees, and securing communication to the leadership in regards to from our council to them. Is there other steps that we would need to take if we were advancing the bills that have been presented today?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say my advice would be simply, I think it's great to be working with leadership and with lobbyists and all those. Those are very important avenues, and those are the channels that'll get things done in a lot of ways. But I think we should get our members of the legislative committee and others to reach out to their local representatives, even if they're not, and senators, even if they're not, directly associated with these particular bills or the committees that these bills are coming up with, because I think a bond issue, for example, has to pass by 2/3. That's a huge lift, particularly with Republicans, many of whom do not like bonding, period. So you really need to figure out how do you overcome the flood of ill will that will break out. It's an election year. It's going to be hard. I think part of the way to do that is just to make sure that rank and file members are aware of what this agenda is. So I would just say, get out there, have coffee with your local legislator, preferably before the session starts, and just say, these are really important issues. Don't know how they're going to go, maybe not in your committee, but I want you to be aware of them. I think that can be really helpful, because if you just get buzz in the building about some of these bills, that's probably the best thing you can ask for. They're definitely looking to cut stuff. There's no question that I think the bill that's out there that you were talking about is in some trouble. I think that's a good. They're trying to figure out ways of not letting stuff in and pushing them to the regular session next year. So I think it is good to try to really focus on whatever does get through the legislative council and on these things that are coming through as carryovers. They'll be taken up and they're important. But particularly the bond, though, I think that's where you want to get that broad support. Does that help?
Yeah, I think for me, the process will be, once the Continuum of Care's board of directors has determined the priorities that they were doing jointly with the statewide homeless council, I think those priorities we can draft a letter for our council members to share with the representatives and senators to highlight these issues to them. So we'll create some tools for people once we've been through the process.
Fabulous.
So that's great. So now, Tara and Scott, I'm going to turn to you because we're all kind of on the screens. There's not many people in the room to show. I'm assuming that through the team's meeting, I can ask for a show of hands, raising of hands as a indication of vote. And I would just need to know from you what the number is to create a majority for the quorum that's present today. Can you help me figure that out with the math? How many votes would show a majority vote in support of a particular proposal? What's the key number we're looking at today?
We have 11 members present, so we would need 6 to create a majority.
And Scott, 11 is a quorum of the statewide homeless council?
Yes. More than
okay,
50%.
Great. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to go through each one of these policy proposals again to ask for support or not. I only wanted to take a vote of support. If we don't get 6, it doesn't pass, and we will not transfer it as consideration to the Continuum of Care Board of Directors. So the first one on the list again is a proposal for increasing shelter funding, LR 2746. Is there a show of hands of support that the statewide homeless council would support that policy in the legislature in 2026 to the Continuum of Care? Show of hands.
I'm so sorry. I cannot find the raise hand thing on my stinking Android phone interface. I'm looking everywhere. I'm going to crash the car. I have no idea what to do. I'm sorry, but I'm going to raise my hand on this one.
That's fine. So you're actually number 6. So that's great. So we have 6 on that one. That's a pass for majority. Lower your hands now if you could.
7, actually. Bruce
7.
Here in house.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for that. Next is the Affordable Housing Construction Bond, which is being carried by the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition, LR 2895. Please raise your hand if you think the council should send that as a priority to the Continuum of Care.
Can you count me too, please? I'm sorry.
That's fine. Great, Andrew. Yeah, keep doing that. Don't worry about that. How many do you have, Scott? I see 7 with Andrew.
8.
8.
Oh.
And I'm missing somebody somewhere. All right,
Bruce
that's
is here
great.
now. You probably can't see his hand up.
Okay, great. Lower your hands. We have a majority on that one. Next is the GA presumptive eligibility, LR 2822, which is going for an appeal. Is that something that we should move forward as a legislative priority for 2026? Please raise your hand.
Yes.
Did you get 6 on that one, Scott?
We have 7.
7, great, awesome. Lower your hand. Next one is the diversion funding bill, LD 641. It was held over for $750,000 to expand mobile outreach and diversion services. Please raise your hand if you think that we should support that bill as a priority to the council continuum of care.
Can you add me, please?
Thank you, Andrew. Scott, do you have a vote on that one?
Andrew makes 9.
9, the high one on that one. Thank you. Lower your hands. And last one, number 5, source of income discrimination, protecting applicants for housing from being discriminated based on public assistance. LD 847 also held over. Please raise your hand if you're in support of that bill.
Eight.
I think we have a majority on that as well, Scott, right?
8 on that one.
Thank you. Lower your hands. Great. All right, we will send this list over to Greg Payne, the board chair of the Continuum of Care, as well as Dean Klein, the executive director, for their consideration to see what policies they wish to do jointly. Again, this is a joint committee, so we have to wait on their vote as well. And then we will move forward with anything that we can. As actually Katie mentioned in the comments, I do want to say that even if a legislative doesn't pass this year or it doesn't become a priority, doesn't mean that the council doesn't decide to work on that matter. And as Emily said, there are certain things that we'll continue to work on together. So this is just a continuation of a dialogue for us as we move into the next legislative session. But I do think it's really important for us to have taken this vote today because it's a process that I think we're trying to, again, coordinate with the continuum of care. And I really want us to consider things thoughtfully. And I really appreciate the time that people take to be a part of the policy committee. Any last minute questions or comments? Aaron, your hand is up. Do you have a question?
Oh, no, I think that was from voting.
Okay, great. Making sure.
I couldn't see the hands on my thing, so I was clicking it multiple times for all the votes and then sometimes just raising my hand because I couldn't get it to work.
That's great. Awesome. We're out. Any other last minute comments or questions? Andrew, do you have any last minute thoughts to share with the group? Great. Please drive safely and we'll get you to the next location. All right, we're moving on to the agenda then. So now we wanted to save at least a half an hour, which we're on time to do, for a discussion with the Shelter Directors Network. We wanted to give them some time to actually talk about what they're experiencing as shelter providers, what they're anticipating this winter, and their thoughts on actually policy legislation or anything that they want to bring to us. We thought it was important to get their voice kind of here for a longer discussion. So I'm happy to turn that part of the discussion over to Dr. Katie Spencer-White from Waterville, and I'll let her talk if she's here and available.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Hi, Katie. Welcome.
Perfect. I'm going to say very little other than to say I facilitate a group known as the Maine Shelter Network, which is a collaboration of shelter directors across the state where we discuss shelter-related issues. We've got 4 great shelter providers from across the state today. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to someone who's well known to all of us, Mark Swan from Preble Street.
Thanks, Katie. Good morning, everybody. And I'm going to be brief. I'm doing the old guy introduction and little history / context. And then I think my colleagues are going to jump in. But as you might expect, and I appreciated the vote I just heard in support of the shelter funding bill, our concerns continue to be the sustainability of the shelter system we have here in Maine. This has been an issue for a long time, and it's not going away. In fact, I think it's getting more and more dangerous, frankly, for the state in terms of our ability to keep people sheltered. I think the shelters play a lot of roles in Maine. They're the front door, for the majority of services and interventions and models. Not all, but most people experiencing homelessness enter the homeless service system through our shelters. They play that role. At the end of the day, they keep people alive, right? I mean, that's their primary role. They also have an outsized expectations, I think, put upon them by communities, mayors, media, other providers. That we're sort of expected to do anything and everything and solve everything and anything by not everybody, but by a lot of parties. A lot of folks look to us / blame us for some of the tragic poverty that we're seeing explode around the country and here in Maine. When there's an encampment issue or business concerns raised or graffiti increasing, the calls come to the emergency shelter networks. They do not go to behavioral health organizations, CAP agencies, hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. They go to shelters. So we are definitely in the, we're squarely in the center of the target, which makes the work that much more challenging and that much tougher for all of us. And if it sounds like I'm whining and complaining, I guess probably because I am. It's really challenging work, and I'm not even mentioning, the challenges of staffing, the trauma that our staff goes through. Last year, we administered Narcan at Preble Street at one of our shelters once every 8 days. That's intense work. So there's a lot to doing the work, and yet the funding is just upside down, and it has made this incredibly important work that much more challenging. So here's some of the history. In the last 15 years or so, 10 or 15 years, a lot of agencies have gotten out of the shelter business, or shelters have closed entirely. Catholic Charities, a very good organization, the largest health and human service agency in Maine, I believe it still is. It's a good organization. They got out of the shelter business. They ran a shelter for years and got out of the shelter business because of the funding problems. The Salvation Army, one of the largest health and human service organizations in the world, got out of the shelter business. They ran a shelter for many years in Portland and closed it because of the funding problems. The YWCA, over 200-year-old organization, ran 2 shelters in Portland, one for girls and one for women. They closed those shelters. The whole agency disappeared. It's now a beautiful parking lot for the Portland Museum of Art. Ingraham, some of you may remember Ingraham, a very strong behavioral health organization. They ran 2 shelters. They closed both of those shelters, merged with Youth Alternatives, another strong agency that ran a shelter. That shelter was closed as well. Maine Adoption Placement Services closed a shelter. There was a shelter in Farmington that closed. Most recently, of course, York County Shelters closed. The only non-domestic violence shelter in York County, the second most populous county in Maine, now does not have a general adult shelter for that entire county because of funding problems. I was down there the day it closed with colleagues from Maine Housing, and a few other organizations were called to do some last minute scrambling to see if there was any possibility of keeping that shelter open, and there was not. And it was a terribly sad experience to be there and watch, people literally wandering that campus, not knowing where they were going to go, carrying garbage bags with all their belongings on them, looking for rides. Meanwhile, you got the media pulling up, and no one really to even speak to the media because the agency was kind of collapsed. It was a terribly sad day. You also, many of you know that Preble Street took over Hope House shelter in Bangor just this past February. And I'll never forget that call from Lori Dwyer, a longtime colleague. I have a lot of respect for her, who runs PCHC up there. She called and said, we've had to make this terrible decision at our board that we cannot keep this shelter going. We can't run it. We're going to close it. And I'm calling to see if you would be interested, willing, and able to keep it going. And I'll leave you with this. That shelter, 56-bed shelter, really important shelter in the third largest city in Maine, costs about $2 million a year to run that shelter. It's an intense, big, low barrier, 24/7 shelter. Costs about $2 million. And we spent 9 months before we took it over finding $2 million to run it with a $1 million deficit. So that was the deal Lori was calling me about. Hey, have I got a deal for you? Run a $2 million program with a $1 million deficit. So with help from the governor, the legislature, allies at state government, we pieced together about $700,000 in new money to make that deficit smaller. And that's only for 2 or 3 years, too. So we have cut this down and made that deficit smaller for 2 or 3 years, and then it well could go back up to $1 million. And the Preble Street board voted to take it over and somehow try to find $300,000 in private funding to run it. This is madness, frankly. These are just not sustainable business models, which is why you have all these shelters closing down, which is why I've had 2 other calls in the last 6 months, plaintiff calls from longtime colleagues saying, can you please take over our shelter as well? It is just, we need help. I'm so glad this group has agreed to support the shelter funding. And I will stop here. I'm happy to answer questions, but I think Molly Feeney is going to jump in and put a little more meat to the bones in terms of her own organization. Molly?
Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Rich. Yeah, and Rich, if there are questions in between, feel free to have folks chime in. But I don't know that there's any better way to sort of set the stage around urgency and history of our state. And so, my intention is really sort of to go into the weeds around some solutioning, even though the solutions are, even in your earlier votes, there's a lot of tentacles to this. But I think one of the things that we've done really intentionally and deliberately as shelter leaders is talk about some focused efforts, and that's shelter funding in this chapter. And a byproduct of that has really been some pretty incredible collaboration and conversation, and a reminder that the infrastructure of shelters around the state of Maine is truly a system. And when one element of that system falters or breaks, it has a profound impact on all of us. And the level of fragility that we're feeling right now, not only because of the cost and of our programs and the very little bit of subsidy that we receive for that, is the environment that we're living in right now. And I certainly don't need to go into the trenches about these realities, because we have sort of a new headline every day that's impacting our marginalized community members already. So the vulnerability is there, the urgency is there. And we have a vehicle. And I think that that's the part that we really want to rally around and use our collective voices on. And you've mentioned the legislation that is existing that moved through Legislative Council. I think that the messaging around that right now is that more details will be revealed as this process goes on, as we build out in collaboration with the legislators that are working on that vehicle. And between now and then, it's really our charge to have this conversation at a state level as loud as we can and as constructively as we can. So Homeworthy, we are releasing an op-ed today, and hopefully that is the beginning of a number of op-eds and some media attention. This is the time of year that we have to really face the realities of the cold weather and the fact that our shelter system is so lean that we really can't afford the loss of one bed, let alone an entire shelter program at any part of our state. And I think that's really needs to sort of be at the front of mind for all of us and our colleagues, that this is the time to acknowledge the incredible win that we had last session in one-time funding, and add the and so not only did that provide sort of a life raft for so many of our colleagues, particularly in Aroostook County, in Western Maine, and even out in Washington County. I mean, it truly was a life preserver, and it proved something. While it was one-time funding, these shelters are able to keep their doors open through the rest of this winter. And so I think really using that narrative as part of our urgency, and letting folks know that actually we do have a funding solution. It's frankly a very reasonable funding solution. We are still angling. We're hoping to see a $5 million increase over the current. After this year's one time, it will return to 2.5 million in shelter operations shares. And I'm happy to get more in the weeds, but it also may not be necessary. So I'll just share that what we're really hoping to achieve is a permanent increase of $5 million onto that 2.5, which will go through the shelter operations share and specifically support the brick and mortar beds to remain open around our state. And truly, if we start seeing some of these collapse, I mean, we're really talking about Mainers who are needing to drive 3+ hours. But the other part of that is that the beds are all occupied. And so it really is sort of this perfect storm of urgency, and us sort of lifting this up as a state, as a collaboration, and really as sort of a solutions thinking group of colleagues, I think is really our best bet right now. And then fortunately, we will have this legislative vehicle, if not everything is, if there's a combination of approaches to being able to achieve additional funding in a permanent way. So I will stop there. And, Andrew, I know you're sort of wearing two hats today too. So if there's other things you want to chime in on, Andrew has really been a leader on this work too. So I'll just pause and see if you want to add anything to my commentary.
Molly, before he jumps in, I do actually have a question,
Go.
and we try to take these on a rolling basis. Tell me, Molly, when you talk about there's just a ballparking figure, currently you're saying that you get 2.5 and you're trying to increase it to 7.5 for an additional 5 million. And if that is true, of that 7.5 million, that would still not cover the entire operating expenses of our emergency shelters. It just takes a state percentage of less than 10% and makes it a little bit larger. Is that true? I just want to have people understand the context we're dealing with.
That's true. With a $2.5 million allocation, each bed averages $7.16 out of the $102 cost.
Right.
This would bring that up to $19 of supplement to that $102 cost.
Right. So I don't want the council to understand that really what they're asking for is an increase, but it doesn't even get to halfway point. Like they're still raising 80% of their operating expenses through other sources, which is a huge burden from a business sustainability model that is still problematic. So I just want to say that they're totally being reasonable with this request. I just want to throw that out as context. Sorry, I had to make that plug, but any other questions or comments?
Well, I actually have a question that's,
Go ahead, Emily.
That's related to that. Rich, thank you for asking that, because that was in my head too. And I guess my question is that enough? I mean, will then we still see shelters really struggling financially? And does that include like the revival of some shelter or shelter beds in York County?
Thanks, Emily. So what we have data on are shelters that have really engaged with us in this process and sort of, vulnerably opened their books, if you will, to be able to say, and I think we were pretty transparent about this last session, that we were really using Aroostook County as sort of the most vulnerable case study, and that mark did get them sort of over that hump of what they need. And this is such an overdue influx of additional permanent funding that it probably is a matter of time before we are looking at an additional need, with the hope that some of this landscape changes. And so I think there is strategy that's embedded in this too, and that we want to come out with something that's realistic. There was pretty decent bipartisan support around this. So politically, I think that this is a really strong vehicle for us. And we also want to be really real and not be putting promises out there that we can't keep, because beds still could be vulnerable when this is all said and done. What I would say is that we can't afford much less to be able to keep this healthy for a respectable amount of time. And so I think that, and it varies from one shelter to another. I mean, I think that's the other piece that we've learned in this conversation with colleagues around the state, is that we all stack our funding so differently, and we all have such different access to resources. And so that becomes really complicated. But if we all just break down our raw shelter costs, it's astronomical. And so the more we can sort of chip away at this, but we don't want to lose this fight from bringing in an unrealistic strategy either. But going below 5 million would be a real challenge for some of our colleagues.
Thanks, Emily, for the question, and thanks, Molly, for taking time to answer our questions. I heard another voice. Did someone else try to jump in with a question?
I think it was me.
Alice had something in the chat, but I couldn't see it all.
Okay. Alice wrote, I appreciate this conversation about emergency shelter. I do want to also share that with all of the shelter beds presently in Maine, there are only 60 allocated for youth experiencing homelessness at this time. So it goes to the issue of equity and disparity for young adults and youth. Thanks, Alice, for reminding us of that. Andrew, did you have other things you want? She was calling on you, and I'm sorry we keep interrupting. Go ahead.
No, not at all. Just as a quick observation. Well, I guess this is a timely moment as any to just plug for anybody on the call that 1 week from tomorrow is the ribbon cutting and open house at Tedford's new shelter facility, which is expanding and replacing both of our shelters. So our family shelter and our adult shelter will be under one roof. And if you think that sounds like an insane proposition, then please come visit our facility and see how we're going to get things done. So we're excited about that. It's been something that the agency was aiming for literally for 11 years. That's how long ago our board adopted that goal. And the really kind of sad part of it is that I know that when we have a higher HIC count ourselves, we will literally be eating the lunch of our counterparts around the state, right? So the pie gets cut into more slices, and everyone is a little bit lower. Everyone's allocation is a little bit lower. And so I feel badly about that, and I'm not sure what my critique is of the structure of the funding, but it is to say that we want to have the right amount of capacity in the system, and I think we all agree that the system shouldn't have less capacity. It's not totally clear how much more it should have, but right now, if we're lucky enough to be able to add capacity, it also undermines everybody who's not adding the beds that day. And so I feel badly about that. But also I'm excited about us swimming upstream at this certain moment where there's a lot of things falling apart, and we're wrapping up a win that frankly can be attributed largely to the fact of the American Rescue Plan and the largesse, the windfall that it created in a lot of places. We have been the lucky recipients of that, and hopefully it will benefit our whole region. I think we heard earlier, people travel a lot to find emergency shelter, so it'll hopefully benefit the whole state marginally, but it's by no means enough. And certainly agree with everything that my colleagues have said about how brutal the sustainability piece of this is. Thanks.
Okay, I think
Thanks.
it's time for me to jump in, Molly, if you're finished with your part of things. So remember that headline. We're currently, based on a wonderful study by Johnny Kurzfeld and the team at Maine Housing, we've got really great empirical data on the cost of emergency shelter. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about why it matters and try to tie together some of the threads that we've heard this morning. It's interesting. What we're trying to do right now is preserve the status quo in an era, in a moment when we should really be looking at expanding shelter provision based on everything that Dean has shared with us today. This is a Cat 5 hurricane, and we are totally unprepared. We have no flood defenses. We're absolutely exposed when the rents go unpaid, and when people start hitting those streets, we've got no give in the system to meet the demand of those 1,300 people, 1,200 people who are really facing immediate homelessness. Notwithstanding we already see rises in cost of rent and really painfully low rental vacancy rates in all of our communities. If you look at that data, if you go and pull your Zillow data for your community and you see a rental vacancy rate of less than 5%, you've got a statistically almost zero rental vacancy rate. It's going to be extraordinarily hard for us to leverage permanent housing as an off-ramp. One of the things that Andrew just mentioned is, how do we know how big the capacity needs to be? And I would offer this briefly. We all know that we collect an extraordinary amount of data through HMIS and other systems. When I tell you, in my opinion, that we could with pinpoint precision, predict how much and the exact location of where we need to expand capacity based on the data that we already have. We just lack the capacity to wrestle with that data. And again, we're not going to get more capacity if the continuum of care program is at risk. So we're going to have to start really thinking intentionally and outside the box about how we want to move forward. One of the things Dean didn't mention is the policy suggestions coming out of the Trump administration. There's more to come. This is not as bad as it's going to get. And so what we're left with is an emergency response, and that's where the emergency shelter system comes in. We are the ERs. We need a healthy housing system, just like we need a healthy healthcare system. We all know that prevention is the name of the game, but when people cannot have an emergency situation, they need someplace to go right then, right there. And those are typically your shelters. One of the things we also hear consistently, and I know everybody here has heard it, we've seen the headlines in our newspapers, is there's a real tension around rising homelessness, and in particular street homelessness, and the friction that creates in our communities when people who want to go out to dinner feel like they have to walk over people experiencing homelessness, when people are worried about their cars being broken into. And those are very real concerns. We have focused for a long time on the moral cause, the moral rationale for shelter. But one of the things that we certainly today know that we honestly didn't know a month ago is that we have a significant impact on reducing the negative externalities of homelessness. Now, what do I mean by that? Swanee cautioned me not to pepper you all with a lot of data, but thanks to Johnny Kurzfeld from Maine Housing and Kelly Watson, who sent it to me, a brand new study is just hit the interwebs. It's an amazing quantitative study that it's really one of the first of its kind that positively, with statistical significance, demonstrates the positive effect of shelter. We've been the redheaded stepchild of the homeless response system for far too long. In fact, at the same time this study hit my computer, the International Journal of Homelessness published a hit job on shelter. So let me just say that this quantitative study demonstrates that the benefits of shelter don't necessarily accrue to the housing system. We know this, right? But where do those credits emerge? Where do we see the positive benefits in shelter? And here's what this quantitative study showed. We significantly reduce crime. We significantly reduce ER visits from mental health emergencies. And most importantly, we substantially reduce mortality from people who are unsheltered. Importantly, we are far more cost effective than the healthcare or the prison system. And unsheltered homelessness is the most expensive way to deal with homelessness. One other thing I'm going to add, because I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to hand it over to Boyd in just a moment, is how we do what we do matters as much as the fact that we're doing it. We have all seen the headlines. We've all seen the executive order. We all see what is being constructed in the state of Utah right now. We are moving to a carceral system. Dean just mentioned today as well that our continuum funds are being opened up to carceral system providers and religious providers, people who don't share our values that are rooted in a social work model of care. That is advocacy for people, with people, and for people, alongside people. It is a system based on positive regard and the belief in recovery, that people can recover from mental illness, they can recover from poverty, they can recover from addiction, that there is a way forward that doesn't require us to incarcerate and submit people to forced treatment. If we don't support the shelter system now, we will lose more providers and we will open the door for a carceral system that runs contrary to our values. So I'm gonna leave it there and just say the data is now emerging, incontrovertible. We have tremendous positive benefits where there are shelters. Certainly in Waterville, we've had a no turn away policy for several years. Our local business providers now can tell the difference literally one day to the next when warming center is open and we turn no one away, and the next day when we're back to ordinary time. What we do matters. It has a positive impact. And if you haven't caught, I do want to give a shout out to Tara mentioned Mark Horvath. If you haven't caught his Invisible People podcast, you can get it on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. It will provide you with a tremendous amount of information on this thing called positive benefit to community members of how we're messaging what we're doing. This study and the work that we're doing is going to be the driving force in keeping Mainers across the aisle on side and on board with what we're doing. We solve problems. We work hard so the rest of Maine doesn't have to. And I hope we continue to advocate strongly for the work. Boyd?
Thank you. I know we're running out of time, so I'll be brief. Most everyone hit on the points that I was going to talk about anyway, but one of the things I want to talk about here is the Bangor area shelter. Was when Hope House was on the chopping block of possibly closing, that would have overrun. We would have had to completely change how we do business here. The same with Aroostook County. If the shelter in Aroostook County closes, Bangor is the next logical step for those folks to come. So if one of these shelters closes, it puts pressure on others, and then they start to fall like dominoes. And it was a really great question that and Molly talked about is, $20 out of $100 is what we're going to be reimbursed if we get this, if this goes through with some more permanent funding. It was a really great job last session. And I think all the legislatures heard and know that this is a situation. My fear is that they think now they've stopped that because they gave us some money. And that money it was great and it did what it was supposed to, but it was limited. And if we don't get something on a more permanent basis, the system will fold and fall like dominoes. And we talked about what do shelter directors do and what should the priorities be for policies. And if you ranked them 1 to 10, it would be funding shelters. And I'll save the last 2 minutes for questions if anyone has any.
Hey, thanks, Katie and Boyd. I really appreciate that. Are there questions from the group? The Statewide Homeless Council has been aware for over a year or more, actually more than that, for several years, about the fragility of financial stability of our emergency shelter system. It is a crisis, and this will be one of the highest priorities for us, I think, in the legislative session. We will do everything we can to pull communication in regards to this and try to get the word out. I hope that you'll continue to work with us at the council to tell us what we should be doing in order to support that as we move forward. I will work with Dean and Greg through the continuum of care to figure out what policy priorities they wish to put forward as well, in joint with us. As like I said, it has to be a joint coordinated activity. One thing I am wondering about is we haven't had this type of discussion with the shelter providers for a long time, and I'm really glad we could carve out some time today. But of course, a half an hour is not adequate to try to talk about the shelter system in all its regards. One of the things that I'm also interested in as the chair of the Statewide Homeless Council is how our hub regions and coordinated entry interface with shelter. Are there things that should be improved in regards to that? What are the feedback we get? So we may be inviting some of you back to give us that discussion later on this winter, probably not in December, but maybe in early 2026. I'd like to have that communication discussion with us. But I really appreciate the discussion today. And Katie or others, are there things that you wish the council to do or to be aware of now before we get off the call today? Any last minute requests for the council? I really appreciate your time today.
Anybody should jump in. I'm not sure if Swanee is still here. I would just say For all shelters, funding is an existential crisis. It quite literally keeps all of us awake at night, not only because of the people that we can't serve, but because of the people who are employed by us. Very often there's an assumption that providing shelter is a common sense activity. It doesn't require any kind of skill or professional know-how. And I would just say I've been in several regulated professions, and the work of providing shelter is one of the most difficult things I personally have ever done. And so think carefully as a statewide homeless council about what our vision for Maine looks like. Certainly as a low barrier shelter provider. And I will also say, you know, my little window into what it takes to provide shelter to youth as well. This is not work that we can delegate to volunteers, volunteer run, startup, community-based organizations. To do it well and to do it in a way that maximizes the benefit of shelter, it really requires professional expertise. So continue to advocate for well-run, professionally trained social work model of providing homeless shelter. That's the critical thing.
Thank you again for being with us today. It's been great. And thanks for the whole team, for all of you, for Molly and Swanee and Andrew and Boyd. Really appreciate your time. We will keep the agenda going. Please, for the council's sake, I look forward to having the next call for the Statewide Homeless Council on Tuesday, December 9th. Keep lookout for communication in regards to the continuum of care NOFA and any action that needs to be taken in regards to that. And we will provide updates before the December meeting in regards to our policy priorities as well. Thanks everybody for the time today. It's always great to be with you. Sending you my blessings for a healthy and happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Keep well.